Silence is stronger than self-justification because silence is the purest form of confidence. When you choose not to defend yourself, you make a declaration that your character and your actions are enough to speak for you. The urge to explain, to clarify, to make people see your point of view often comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear of losing approval. But when you remain silent, when you refuse to rush into verbal defense, you shift the balance of power. The one who speaks frantically reveals uncertainty. The one who stays calm and measured communicates strength. Silence is not weakness, it is composure manifested. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need your validation to keep being it. When someone attacks your integrity or questions your motives, you're being offered a test, not of your intelligence, not even of your morality, but of your inner stability. Most people are trained to react immediately. The moment they feel cornered, they start explaining, sometimes over-explaining, thinking that words can rescue their reputation. But words used defensively rarely convince anyone. Instead, they often amplify the perception that there is something to defend. Silence, on the other hand, carries an entirely different message. It suggests that the truth doesn't need your anxious protection. The truth stands on its own, quietly, immovably, and in time, it reveals itself. There's an ancient wisdom in restraint. To remain silent in the face of accusation doesn't mean you agree with the accusation. It means you refuse to give it more life. Every defensive statement feeds the fire of misunderstanding. People who accuse you are often not searching for truth, but for reaction. They want emotional proof that they've struck a nerve, that they hold some power over your peace of mind. When you remain silent, you deny them that satisfaction. You reveal that your self-worth isn't negotiable, and that no amount of verbal assault can disturb your sense of who you are. That's not indifference, that's discipline of the soul. In the modern world, especially with the endless noise of social media and opinion, everyone feels pressured to have a response, immediately, loudly, and passionately. But that kind of instant reaction is often just insecurity disguised as engagement. When you step back, when you don't rush to explain yourself, you create space between stimulus and response. And in that space, you find your power. That pause allows you to see what's really happening. Maybe the criticism is unjust, maybe it's partially true, maybe it's entirely irrelevant. But you only see clearly when you're quiet. Silence gives you perspective that defense destroys. There's a difference between being right and needing to be seen as right. The second is a trap of the ego. The ego wants to win arguments, to prove its superiority, to make sure everyone else acknowledges its righteousness. But that's a never-ending battle. Even if you convince one critic, another will appear. The pursuit of approval becomes an addiction, and the more you chase it, the more you lose yourself. Silence breaks that addiction. It's a way of saying, I am not participating in this endless game of perception. You withdraw your energy from the drama and invest it in your own development, in your competence, in your integrity. Over time, those qualities speak louder than any defense ever could. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't defend themselves. It unnerves people because it contradicts the usual script. Most expect argument, justification, emotional reaction. When none of that comes, they start to doubt their own judgment. Your silence becomes a mirror in which they must confront their own motives. Were they seeking truth or just conflict? Did they genuinely misunderstand, or were they trying to provoke you? Silence forces reflection, not in you, but in them. It transforms the dynamic entirely because the power shifts from the accuser to the accused. You no longer play by their rules. You create a new field altogether, one defined by calmness and strength rather than noise and insecurity. Silence also teaches you to trust the unfolding of time. Truth has its own rhythm. It doesn't need to be forced into the spotlight. In the long run, people remember consistency far more than argument. They notice the patterns of your behavior, the steadiness of your character, the quality of your work. These things don't need defending. They are their own defense. The impatient need for immediate vindication is a form of weakness. It shows that you can't bear uncertainty, that you're enslaved to other people's opinions. But if you can tolerate that discomfort, if you can remain silent even when you're misjudged, you cultivate a strength that no approval can give you. To master silence in moments of accusation requires humility. It requires you to admit that not every attack deserves an answer, not every misunderstanding deserves correction, and not every critic deserves your attention. That's not arrogance, that's discernment. It's knowing that your energy is finite and that wasting it on explaining yourself to those unwilling to understand is a betrayal of your own focus. You could be building something meaningful instead. You could be improving, learning, creating, serving. Every minute spent in self-defense is a minute stolen from progress. Silence reclaims that time. There's also an element of faith in silence. Faith that truth has its own gravity, that reality doesn't need you to force it into being. When you live with integrity, your actions accumulate evidence on your behalf. You become someone who doesn't need to say, "Trust me," because trust naturally follows your consistency. And when accusations come, as they inevitably do, they bounce off that consistency like arrows against stone. The people who know you won't need explanation. The people who don't know you wouldn't believe you anyway. So why speak? Why defend? Let the silence bear witness to your strength, because silence, when rooted in truth, is louder than any defense you could ever utter. Let your competence defend you, because in the end, words fade but performance remains. You can talk endlessly about your intentions, your struggles, your good heart, but the world listens to results. Competence is the most honest language there is. It's the expression of who you are through what you can actually do. When you become truly competent at something, when you dedicate yourself to mastery, you eliminate the need to explain yourself. You stop needing to convince others of your worth, because your ability speaks for you. The competent person doesn't argue for validation. They demonstrate it through precision, through consistency, through the quiet excellence of their work. The problem with defending yourself is that it keeps you trapped in the realm of talk. And talk is fragile. Anyone can construct a narrative. Anyone can tell a story. Anyone can craft a defense that sounds persuasive. But competence exists beyond the reach of rhetoric. It's tangible, it's measurable, it's undeniable. When you perform with excellence, your results echo louder than any justification. People can argue with your words, but they cannot argue with your ability. That's why competence is the ultimate defense. It's the one thing that remains when all opinions dissolve. Becoming competent requires humility because it demands you face the uncomfortable truth about your own inadequacy. You have to accept that you're not yet what you could be, that your current level of skill or understanding isn't enough. Most people prefer the comfort of explanation over the discomfort of growth. They'd rather defend their current state than confront their potential. But competence doesn't grow in defense, it grows in discipline. You don't become strong by telling the world you're strong. You become strong by doing what strength requires every single day, even when no one's watching. There's something noble about the person who quietly devotes themselves to their craft, who spends years refining their abilities while others chase recognition. That person doesn't need to defend their character or their motives because their competence makes defense unnecessary. You can't argue with a surgeon who saves lives, or a teacher whose students thrive, or a craftsman whose work endures. Their results are their reputation. Their competence protects them from the noise of criticism because it stands as proof that their energy is invested in substance, not perception. Criticism loses its power when you're competent, not because people stop talking, but because their words stop mattering. The more you master your field, the more irrelevant external judgment becomes. You develop an inner authority that's stronger than public opinion. That authority is built from the countless hours you've spent working, failing, improving, adjusting. You know the cost of your progress, so no one can take it from you with a careless comment or accusation. You become untouchable in a quiet way, not through arrogance, but through the calm confidence of knowing that you've earned your place. Competence is not just about skill. It's about alignment between your values and your performance. It means doing what you say you will do, following through even when it's inconvenient, and building a track record of reliability that speaks louder than any speech could. When people see that your words and your actions consistently match, they start trusting you instinctively. They may not even like you, but they'll respect you. And respect built on competence is far more stable than admiration built on charisma or persuasion. Charisma fades. Persuasion can be challenged. Competence endures. It's also worth understanding that competence silences not only the criticism of others, but also the inner voice of self-doubt. When you know what you're capable of, when you've seen yourself execute with precision, you stop needing reassurance. You begin to trust your own judgment. That trust liberates you from the endless cycle of self-defense. Instead of asking, do they believe in me? You start asking, am I living up to my own standard? That shift is transformative. It moves your attention from the external to the internal, from performing for approval to performing for mastery. Competence is built in solitude. It's built in those hours when no one sees your effort, when the applause is silent and the progress is invisible. That's where the real defense is forged, not in argument, not in debate, but in the quiet repetition of disciplined action. Every time you practice when you could procrastinate, every time you choose precision over ease, every time you face failure and return stronger, you're building a kind of shield. That shield doesn't make you invincible, but it makes you grounded. When the world questions your worth, you can stand calmly, knowing that your competence will answer in its own time. There's a deep kind of peace that comes from competence. It's not arrogance or pride, it's assurance. You no longer feel compelled to correct every misunderstanding or respond to every challenge. You can let others talk, speculate, criticize while you keep working. Eventually, your results will make the noise irrelevant. The truth of competence is patient. It doesn't need to rush to prove itself. It simply keeps showing up day after day until even the loudest skeptic has nothing left to say. In a world obsessed with image, competence is revolutionary. Most people spend their energy trying to appear impressive rather than becoming impressive. They polish the surface, but the substance beneath is fragile. When you focus on competence, you reverse that. You build something solid inside yourself that no criticism can shake. You stop trying to control what others think because you're too busy mastering what you can do. And that mastery, that deep, quiet competence, becomes your unspoken defense. Not through words, not through argument, but through undeniable ability that needs no explanation. Guilt thrives on explanation because the very act of defending yourself often plants the seed of guilt where there was none. When you rush to explain, to justify, to clear your name, you subconsciously acknowledge the possibility that the accusation has merit. You accept the frame imposed on you, and in doing so, you become trapped within it. Guilt feeds on that energy, the energy of anxiety, of needing to be seen as innocent. The more you try to prove that you are good, the more you imply that your goodness is in question. True innocence doesn't scramble for validation. It simply exists calm and unmoved because it knows the truth doesn't depend on perception. People often misunderstand guilt as something that comes only from wrongdoing. But there's another kind of guilt, the kind that arises when you feel compelled to explain yourself to those who have no right to your explanation. It's the guilt of wanting to be understood by everyone, of trying to fix every misunderstanding. You start believing that your peace depends on others' acceptance, and when that acceptance isn't given, guilt grows like a shadow. You begin to doubt yourself, not because you've done wrong, but because you can't make them see your rightness. That kind of guilt is insidious. It attaches itself to your sense of worth and quietly drains your strength. When you explain yourself, especially to those who've already judged you, you give them control over your emotional state. You hand them the power to decide when you're forgiven, when you're redeemed, when you're acceptable again. But they can't truly give you those things because forgiveness and redemption are internal matters. You don't owe explanations to those who only want to confirm their biases. Every word you offer in defense becomes a resource for their next accusation. Guilt thrives on that cycle, on your inability to stop feeding it with justifications. It convinces you that if you could just say the right thing, they'd finally understand. But they won't because their goal isn't understanding, it's dominance, and dominance grows when you participate in your own diminishment. There's a quiet strength in letting accusations hang unanswered. When you don't respond, guilt has nowhere to grow. It withers in silence. Explanations are like oxygen for guilt. They keep it alive, expanding, multiplying in the mind. You start replaying conversations, crafting better arguments in your head, rehearsing what you should have said. And in that process, you become consumed. Your attention, your creativity, your emotional energy, all of it gets trapped in the endless loop of defense. That's how guilt wins. It doesn't need proof of wrongdoing. It only needs your attention. Children learn this pattern early. When they're accused of something, they scramble to explain, to justify, to avoid punishment. It's a natural response to authority and fear. But when we carry that same reflex into adulthood, it becomes self-destructive. The mature soul doesn't explain itself to every critic. because it understands that explanation doesn't equal absolution. In fact, the need to explain often exposes a deeper insecurity, the inability to stand firm in one's own truth without external approval. Guilt feeds on insecurity like fire feeds on fuel. The more you give it, the more it consumes. The paradox of guilt is that it can masquerade as morality. You think your explanations are noble, that they show accountability, transparency, honesty, and in some cases, they do. But more often, they're a subtle plea for sympathy. You want others to see that your intentions were good, that your mistakes were unintentional, that you're still worthy of their respect. That plea might soothe your conscience temporarily, but it strengthens the habit of dependence. Each time you seek relief through explanation, you teach yourself that peace must come from outside. Guilt then becomes your master, always demanding another confession, another justification, another reassurance that you're still good enough. The only real antidote to guilt is responsibility without defense. You acknowledge what's true, correct what's wrong, and move forward, without the emotional theater of self-explanation. Guilt wants the drama. It wants you tangled in the emotions of regret and justification. Responsibility is simpler, quieter. It doesn't negotiate with judgment, it acts. When you replace defense with disciplined action, guilt has no room to root itself. You stop living reactively and start living intentionally. The focus shifts from how you are perceived to what you are becoming. The need to explain yourself also reveals a lack of trust in time. You want to fix everything immediately. To clear your name, to restore your image, to ensure no one misunderstands you. But time, not argument, is the great revealer. Given enough time, truth always surfaces. People forget words, but they remember consistency. Guilt can't survive long in the face of steady, unflinching integrity. It thrives only in short-term panic, in the desperate rush to manage appearances. The more you trust time and the process of truth, the less you'll feel compelled to justify yourself. There's also a spiritual element to this. When you over-explain, you're trying to control what is beyond your control, the thoughts and judgments of others. Guilt tells you that you can't be at peace until they see you the way you see yourself. But peace that depends on universal understanding is an illusion. You'll never be fully understood, and that's not a tragedy. It's the condition of human existence. When you accept that, guilt loses its leverage. You stop trying to edit reality and start living within it. Guilt thrives on explanation because explanation keeps you looking backward. You're always revisiting what happened, why it happened, what you could have done differently. But the present moment doesn't need that story, it needs attention and direction. Every time you turn back to explain yourself, you're giving the past another chance to define you. The more you explain, the more you identify with what went wrong instead of what's possible now. True liberation begins when you stop feeding that narrative. Let silence dissolve the need for defense, let competence prove your growth, and let time reveal your truth. In that stillness, guilt loses its home. Integrity nullifies accusation because a person rooted in truth cannot be shaken by opinion. When you live in alignment with your values, when your actions match your words, and your words arise from honesty, accusations lose their weight. They may still come, they may still sting, but they cannot stick. Integrity is a kind of invisible armor, not loud, not boastful, but unbreakable. It doesn't require defense because it exists beyond the reach of manipulation. The person of integrity does not live to please others, nor do they live to avoid judgment. They live according to an internal compass that points unwaveringly toward what is right, even when it's unpopular or inconvenient. Accusation, then, becomes powerless, not because it doesn't happen, but because it cannot pierce through the consistency of truth. Integrity is not perfection. It's the discipline of honesty, even when honesty costs you something. The world is full of people who bend truth to gain approval, who shift their principles to avoid discomfort. But every time you betray what you know to be right, you fracture your own foundation. When accusations come, those fractures turn into entry points for guilt and fear. Integrity seals those fractures. It's the habit of doing what's right when no one's watching, of keeping promises even when they've been forgotten by everyone else. That kind of consistency creates a life that speaks louder than words. When you're accused unjustly, the people who truly know you will not need convincing. They will remember the pattern of your character. Integrity builds credibility so strong that false accusations sound hollow against it. Living with integrity also means accepting that you can't control what others think. Accusations often come from misunderstanding or projection. People will judge you based on fragments of information or their own insecurities, or because your presence challenges something in them. If you react to every accusation, if you scramble to clear your name every time someone misreads your motives, you lose the focus that sustains integrity. You start living for optics instead of truth. Integrity demands steadiness, the ability to remain unmoved when the crowd misinterprets your silence. It's the refusal to compromise your principles for the temporary relief of public approval. That kind of steadiness unnerves people because it's rare. It shows that your peace doesn't depend on their agreement. Accusation feeds on inconsistency. When a person's words and actions don't align, even small accusations can grow into something destructive. But when your life is built on integrity, every action reinforces your credibility. It's like a wall made of stone. One accusation might throw dust at it, but the wall stands firm. People might talk for a while, they might speculate, but sooner or later, they face the truth of your consistency. Integrity has a long memory. It doesn't shout, it simply endures. It's patient enough to let time reveal what words cannot. Those who act from deception always need to manage their narratives, to explain and justify endlessly. The person of integrity doesn't need that. They can remain silent, knowing that the truth requires no performance. Integrity is also the ability to confront your own flaws without collapsing into self-deception. It's not about pretending to be right all the time. It's about acknowledging when you're wrong and making it right. Accusations lose power against someone who owns their mistakes. You can't shame a person who tells the truth about themselves. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't hide behind pretense. Integrity transforms vulnerability into strength because it refuses to separate accountability from authenticity. When you live that way, accusations become irrelevant. Even when you are wrong, you're already in the process of correction. There's nothing left for the world to use against you. The integrity-driven person also understands that truth is self-sustaining. You don't need to decorate it or exaggerate it to make it believable. You just live it every day through action. That's why accusations often feel powerless in front of real integrity, because integrity doesn't depend on persuasion. It's visible in the way you treat people, in the consistency of your effort, in your willingness to do what's right when it's inconvenient. Those who know you may not understand every decision you make, but they'll sense the coherence of your life. That coherence is stronger than any argument. It's the quiet force that replaces the need for defense. There's also a certain dignity that integrity brings. It prevents you from lowering yourself into the chaos of accusation and counter-accusation. When you're attacked unfairly, the impulse is to retaliate, to prove the other person wrong, to expose their hypocrisy. But the moment you do that, you've descended into the same realm they occupy, the realm of reaction, bitterness, and noise. Integrity keeps you above that. It reminds you that truth doesn't need revenge, only patience. Every time you hold your peace, you preserve your power. You're not avoiding confrontation, you're choosing to fight on the higher ground of principle rather than ego. Integrity demands sacrifice. There will be times when telling the truth isolates you, when refusing to compromise costs you relationships, opportunities, or approval. But every sacrifice strengthens your foundation. Accusations can only destroy what was built on falsehood. They can't touch what was built on truth. The person who builds their life with integrity accepts temporary discomfort for long-term freedom. They understand that false peace bought by deceit is worse than open conflict faced with honesty. Accusation can shake appearances, but it cannot reach the core of someone whose character is whole. In a culture obsessed with image, integrity is revolutionary. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, but it's solid. It allows you to stand alone if necessary without bitterness or despair. You become untouchable in the most profound way, not because you're flawless, but because you're transparent. There's nothing hidden, nothing to defend. The more you live this way, the more immune you become to manipulation and false judgment. Integrity doesn't erase accusation, but it neutralizes it. It turns attack into noise and misunderstanding into insignificance. In the end, integrity is its own defense, its own witness, and its own quiet vindication. Control the narrative by refusing reaction, because the moment you react, you hand over authorship of your own story to someone else. When you respond impulsively to criticism, accusation, or provocation, you let the other person dictate the tone, timing, and direction of your emotions. You become a character in their script rather than the author of your own. The person who controls their reaction controls perception, and perception shapes reality. When you refuse to react, when you choose silence or stillness over defense, you reclaim authority over the situation. You shift from being reactive to being intentional, from being influenced to being influential. True power lies not in controlling others, but in controlling your own emotional energy in the face of chaos. Every conflict begins as a battle for emotional dominance. The one who reacts first usually loses, not because their position is wrong, but because they've allowed emotion to override reason. Reactivity blurs clarity. It makes you speak too soon, explain too much, reveal too deeply. When you rush to justify yourself, you inadvertently confirm the accuser's power. You tell them that their opinion matters enough to disturb your equilibrium. But when you remain composed, when you pause and let their words hang unanswered, the dynamic shifts. They begin to question themselves. They start to wonder why they can't get a reaction. That uncertainty weakens their position, while your stillness strengthens yours. Silence in these moments isn't passivity, it's strategic restraint. Refusing to react doesn't mean ignoring reality or suppressing emotion. It means mastering the discipline of response. There's a profound difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is impulsive, it's driven by ego and fear. Response is deliberate, it's guided by reason and awareness. When you train yourself to pause, to take a breath before speaking, you're not avoiding the situation, you're taking ownership of it. You're deciding that your peace of mind isn't a public commodity to be traded for the illusion of control. That pause, however brief, creates space for wisdom to enter. It allows you to choose words and actions that serve your long-term purpose rather than your momentary pride. Controlling the narrative also means understanding that silence itself communicates. When you refuse to react, people are forced to interpret your stillness. Some will project strength onto it, others indifference. But what matters is that you've kept the power of interpretation in your hands. You've denied them the satisfaction of seeing you flustered, defensive, or desperate. In a world that thrives on reaction, where outrage and instant opinion are currency, composure becomes revolutionary. It's unsettling to those who expect chaos because calmness exposes their own lack of control. When you stay grounded, you hold a mirror up to others, reflecting their impulsiveness back at them. To control the narrative, you must also accept that not every false story needs correction. The desire to fix how others see you is a trap. It keeps you entangled in their version of events. People believe what fits their interests, not necessarily what aligns with the truth. If you waste your energy chasing every rumor or explaining every misunderstanding, you drain yourself in battles that don't advance your purpose. Instead of defending yourself, strengthen your work, refine your actions, and let your consistency reshape perception over time. Reality always catches up. The truth has its own momentum. It doesn't need to be shouted, only lived. Those who provoke you often want to control your emotions, because emotions are the easiest form of manipulation. If they can make you angry, they can steer your behavior. If they can make you defensive, they can paint you as guilty. But if you refuse to react, if you meet provocation with stillness, their power collapses. They're left facing their own emptiness. You can't fight silence, you can only be consumed by it. The refusal to react is not weakness, it's a demonstration of self-command. It says, I decide what deserves my energy and what does not. That kind of composure is rare, and because it's rare, it's powerful. When you control your reaction, you begin to control your environment. People start to see that you're not easily swayed, that you don't operate under emotional pressure. They begin to adjust their tone around you. The chaotic lose interest because chaos feeds on response. This creates a kind of invisible order around you, not through dominance, but through discipline. Your steadiness becomes contagious. Others feel safer, calmer, more measured in your presence. That's the quiet influence of self-control. It reshapes dynamics without a word. Refusing reaction is also a form of trust. Trust in time, trust in truth, and trust in yourself. When you don't rush to defend, you're saying, I can wait for the truth to emerge. You're acknowledging that not every misunderstanding needs immediate correction. That patience is misunderstood in a reactive world, but it's the hallmark of real strength. The one who can wait doesn't lose ground. They let others exhaust themselves in noise while they conserve their energy for meaningful action. Time exposes falsehoods more effectively than argument ever could. There's a psychological advantage in stillness, too. When you don't react, you remain the observer instead of the participant. You can analyze patterns, see motives, and anticipate behavior. Most people can't do that because they're too busy defending themselves. But when you refuse reaction, you move into a higher position of awareness. You begin to see the broader game being played. And when you see the game, you can choose how to move, or whether to move at all. That awareness transforms potential conflict into clarity. Ultimately, controlling the narrative isn't about manipulation, it's about mastery. Mastery of self, of emotion, of focus. You become the calm in the storm rather than another piece of debris tossed around by it. When you no longer react to every provocation, you send a clear signal to the world your energy is precious, your peace is protected, and your story will not be written by anyone else's hand. You let time, truth, and quiet consistency do the speaking, and in that stillness, you hold all the power. The undefended life is the truly powerful life because it is built on a foundation of self-trust so deep that external judgment cannot disturb it. When you live without the constant urge to explain yourself, to prove your worth, or to manage the opinions of others, you free yourself from invisible chains. Most people spend their lives performing, defending their decisions, justifying their failures, apologizing for their ambitions. They are trapped in a cycle of reaction, always trying to control how they are seen. But the undefended person has stepped out of that arena entirely. They have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to protect that isn't already secure within them. That kind of peace radiates a strength that words cannot imitate. The undefended life doesn't mean a careless or indifferent existence. It's not about ignoring accountability or avoiding responsibility. It's about realizing that truth doesn't need a spokesperson. If you are living in alignment with your values, if your actions are consistent with your principles, then defense becomes redundant. You no longer feel the need to convince anyone of your integrity because your integrity is self-evident. People sense it in your presence, in your tone, in your steadiness. There's a gravity to someone who is unguarded yet unshaken, open yet immovable. That kind of presence cannot be faked. It can only be earned through authenticity. Defensiveness is rooted in fear, the fear of rejection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing control over how you are perceived. It's a fear that keeps you small, constantly negotiating your place in the world. The undefended person, on the other hand, understands that misunderstanding is inevitable, that rejection is a part of life, and that control over perception is an illusion. Once you accept those truths, you stop wasting energy on resistance. You stop performing for approval. You start living from the inside out, not from the outside in. And when you live that way, every action, every silence, every expression carries a quiet authority that no argument can replicate. The undefended life also teaches humility. When you no longer defend yourself, you become open to feedback, to correction, to learning. Defensiveness blocks growth because it makes every challenge feel like a threat. But when you drop your guard, when you stop protecting your ego, you can finally listen without fear. You can hear truth even when it hurts. That's where wisdom begins, not in proving yourself right, but in being unafraid to see where you're wrong. The undefended person doesn't cling to an image of perfection. They value authenticity over reputation. They would rather be real and misunderstood than false and admired. There's a profound freedom in living this way. You stop carrying the heavy burden of image maintenance. You no longer rehearse explanations in your head or worry about how to justify every choice. You simply do what aligns with your truth, and you let time do the talking. This doesn't make you invincible to pain. It makes you resilient to distortion. When others misinterpret you, you can let it pass without bitterness because you know that their perception doesn't define your reality. The undefended life isn't a shield against criticism. It's a refusal to let criticism dictate your sense of self. You stop needing agreement to feel secure, and that detachment is one of the highest forms of inner strength. To live undefended, you must accept vulnerability as a natural part of existence. The instinct to defend is the instinct to hide your softness, to protect yourself from potential harm. But power doesn't come from pretending to be invulnerable. It comes from realizing that you can survive openness. You can stand without armor and still remain whole. When you no longer fear exposure, no one can manipulate you through shame. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, no one can control you through judgment. The undefended life is not the absence of vulnerability. It is the mastery of it. You become open, transparent, and unafraid of being seen for who you are. Living undefended also transforms your relationships. When you're not constantly trying to justify yourself, conversations become cleaner, deeper, more honest. You listen without waiting to respond, and you speak without trying to impress. People feel safer around you because they sense that you're not playing a game. You don't need to win, to prove, or to persuade. You simply exist in truth, and that authenticity invites authenticity in return. The undefended person becomes a grounding presence for others. Someone whose calm doesn't waver even when emotions run high. That stability has a quiet magnetism. It draws people in, not because you demand their approval, but because they find peace in your lack of need. The undefended life also aligns you with reality rather than illusion. Defensiveness is often an attempt to fight reality, to resist what's being said, to reshape perception, to deny what is. But when you accept reality as it is, you stop fighting. You stop arguing with what's already true. That acceptance isn't surrender, it's wisdom. You understand that you can't control how others interpret your life, but you can control how you live it. You can control your effort, your integrity, your response. The undefended person focuses on those things and leaves the rest to unfold naturally. That's why their peace seems unshakable. It's not built on conditions, it's built on alignment with what's real. There's an elegance in being undefended. It's not loud, it's not showy, it doesn't seek attention. It's the quiet power of someone who has made peace with themselves. You can feel it in the way they move, the way they listen, the way they speak without urgency. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't scramble to justify mistakes. They don't fight to be understood. They simply live, and their life itself becomes their statement. The undefended person understands that truth needs no defense and authenticity needs no explanation. To live undefended is to step beyond fear, beyond the fragile ego that constantly demands validation. It's to stand at the center of your being and know that nothing outside of you can truly add or subtract from who you are. You can be accused, misunderstood, criticized, even rejected, and still remain whole. You can let others speak, project, judge, and you stay rooted in your own clarity. The undefended life is not about withdrawal from the world. It's about engaging with it fully, courageously, without armor. It is the highest expression of inner strength, the calm confidence that comes from living in truth so completely that no defense is ever required. At the heart of everything we've explored, silence, competence, integrity, and restraint, lies a single truth. Real strength does not announce itself. It does not rush to explain, to defend, or to demand validation. True strength stands quietly, anchored in character and guided by purpose. When you stop defending yourself, you stop living in reaction to the world and start living in creation of it. You rise above the noise of accusation, misunderstanding, and judgment, and you learn to let your truth breathe on its own. The path of the undefended life is not easy. It demands patience when you're provoked, composure when you're doubted, and faith when you're misunderstood. It asks you to build a foundation so strong within yourself that no external storm can shake it. But once you embrace that discipline, you discover something extraordinary: freedom. Freedom from the endless need to be seen as right, freedom from the exhaustion of constant justification, and freedom from the fragile approval of others. In the end, your silence will speak, your competence will prove, your integrity will endure, and your calm will command respect. The world will test you, question you, even oppose you, but none of that will define you. Because the moment you stop defending yourself, you stop being controlled by perception, and you start becoming the person who defines it. That is where true power begins, not in reaction, but in quiet, unwavering self-possession.